There comes a point where being strong no longer feels empowering. It just feels tiring. Not the kind of tiredness that sleep fixes. Not the kind that disappears after a weekend or a short break. It's a deeper exhaustion. The kind that sits in your chest the moment you wake up. The kind that follows you into conversations, errands, work, and even quiet moments that are supposed to feel peaceful. You move through the day carrying things nobody can see. Responsibilities, pressure, old disappointments, unspoken sadness. The habit of always holding yourself together, no matter what happens. And after a while, you become so used to carrying it that you stop noticing how heavy it actually is. You tell yourself, this is normal. You say, I'm just tired. But deep down, it's more than tiredness. It's emotional weight that has been building for years. What makes this kind of exhaustion difficult is that it often stays invisible. People may see you functioning normally. You still show up. You still reply to messages. You still laugh at the right moments. You still handle what needs to be handled. So nobody realizes how close you are to emotional burnout. Because you learned very early how to suffer quietly. You learned how to keep your emotions organized enough that they never inconvenience anyone else. You learned how to continue smiling while feeling overwhelmed inside. You learned how to say, I'm okay, before even checking whether it was true. And maybe at first, that helped you survive difficult periods in your life. Maybe there were moments when you truly had no choice except to keep going. So you adapted. You became the dependable one, the calm one, the person who could carry stress without falling apart publicly. But over time, constantly suppressing what you feel begins to change you. You become emotionally tired in ways you cannot fully explain. Small things affect you more than they used to. Simple conversations feel draining. You begin craving isolation, not because you dislike people, but because being emotionally available all the time has exhausted you. Sometimes you sit in silence and realize you cannot remember the last time you truly felt relaxed, not distracted, not temporarily entertained, actually relaxed. Your body rests, but your mind stays alert. Your emotions stay tense. Even during peaceful moments, something inside you remains prepared for pressure. That is what happens when someone spends years carrying too much alone. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And many people unknowingly build their entire lives around unprocessed emotional weight. They become productive, responsible, and capable while silently ignoring how overwhelmed they truly feel. The difficult part is that emotional suppression can look like maturity from the outside. People praise you for being strong, for being independent, for handling everything so well. But they rarely see the cost. They do not see the nights where your mind refuses to slow down. They do not see how exhausting it becomes to constantly appear emotionally stable while internally carrying fear, sadness, pressure, and loneliness. And eventually, you stop asking for support altogether. Not because you do not need it, because you convince yourself that needing help would make you weak, dramatic, or difficult. So instead, you carry everything quietly. You carry heartbreak quietly, stress quietly, disappointment quietly, loneliness quietly. You become so skilled at hiding your emotional pain that even the people closest to you may not realize how much you are struggling. And one of the saddest parts of this experience is that many people who carry too much alone begin feeling guilty for their exhaustion. They think, other people have bigger problems. I should be grateful. I just need to push through it. So they continue ignoring themselves. They continue giving energy they no longer have. They continue showing up emotionally for everyone else while slowly disappearing from themselves. But eventually, the emotional weight starts showing up in other ways. In constant fatigue, in emotional numbness, in irritability, in feeling disconnected from life, in losing excitement for things that once mattered. Because emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They wait. And the longer someone carries everything alone, the more they begin to feel like survival has replaced living. Not because they are broken, because no human being was meant to carry endless emotional weight without care, honesty, support, or rest. One of the saddest things about carrying emotional pain for a long time is that eventually being alone with it starts to feel normal. Not comfortable, just familiar. You stop expecting people to truly understand you. You stop believing that opening up will make a difference. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin building your life around emotional isolation. At first, it happens quietly. You stop mentioning what hurts because you don't want to ruin the mood. You stop explaining how overwhelmed you feel because you think other people are already dealing with enough. You say things like, "It's fine," or "Don't worry about me," even when a part of you desperately wishes someone would stay and ask again. And over time, this becomes automatic. You become the person who listens instead of speaks. The person who checks on everyone else while ignoring what is happening inside yourself. You learn how to keep conversations focused on other people because talking about your own emotions starts to feel uncomfortable. Not because you have nothing to say, because you've spent so long holding everything in that you no longer know how to let people in naturally. Sometimes, emotional isolation is created after disappointment. You opened up once and felt dismissed. You tried explaining your feelings and were misunderstood. Maybe someone told you that you were too sensitive. Maybe your emotions were ignored, laughed at, or treated like an inconvenience. And experiences like that stay with people longer than they admit. So eventually, you stop reaching. Not because you stopped needing support, because protecting yourself started feeling safer than hoping someone would understand. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And that kind of loneliness can exist even in a crowded room. You can have conversations all day and still feel emotionally unseen. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like nobody truly knows how heavy your mind has become. That is the painful part of emotional isolation. From the outside, your life may look completely normal. You still work. You still talk to people. You still function. But internally, you feel disconnected because there's a difference between being around people and feeling emotionally safe with them. Many people who carry emotional weight alone become extremely independent. They convince themselves they can handle everything on their own because depending on others feels risky. So they stop asking for help. Stop expressing needs. Stop admitting when they are struggling. And after years of doing this, emotional silence becomes part of their identity. People start describing them as strong, private, or low maintenance. But often, those words hide a deeper reality. They simply became used to surviving without emotional support. The problem is that isolation slowly changes the way a person experiences life. You begin overthinking everything internally because you have nobody to process emotions with honestly. Small problems feel larger because they stay trapped in your mind. Pain grows heavier because it has nowhere to go. And eventually, even when someone genuinely wants to support you, it feels unfamiliar. You hesitate. You hold back. You almost feel guilty for needing comfort at all. That is what emotional isolation does. It teaches people to suppress their needs until they forget they are allowed to have them. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And before healing becomes anything complicated, it often begins with something very simple. Admitting that constantly carrying everything alone has hurt you. Admitting that isolation protected you at one point, but it also exhausted you. Because human beings are not built to emotionally survive entirely on their own, no matter how capable they appear, no matter how independent they become. At some point, everyone needs honesty, understanding, reassurance, and connection. And sometimes, the first step out of emotional isolation is not suddenly telling everyone your deepest feelings. Sometimes, it's smaller than that. Allowing yourself to answer honestly when someone asks how you are. Letting yourself admit, even privately, that you've been emotionally tired for a long time. Recognizing that needing support does not make you weak. It makes you human. For a long time, you tell yourself you're just getting through a difficult phase. You believe things will calm down eventually. You think once you solve the next problem, finish the next responsibility, or make it through the next stressful period, you'll finally feel lighter again. But somehow, that relief never fully comes. The pressure changes shape, but it never really leaves. And little by little, you stop noticing how disconnected you've become from yourself. You wake up already thinking about what needs to be done. Your days become routines of responsibility, emotional management, and mental exhaustion. You keep moving because stopping feels uncomfortable. So you stay busy. You focus on tasks. You distract yourself with productivity. And from the outside, your life may even look stable. But internally, something feels missing. Not dramatic sadness, just emptiness. Like you've been existing for so long in survival mode that you forgot what it feels like to actually enjoy your life while living it. And often, the realization arrives unexpectedly. Maybe it happens during a quiet evening when everything finally slows down for a moment. Maybe someone asks you a simple question, like, "Are you happy?" And you suddenly don't know how to answer. Or maybe you notice how emotionally numb you've become. Things that once excited you barely affect you anymore. Moments that should feel meaningful pass quickly without reaching you emotionally. You laugh sometimes. You function. You continue showing up. But deep inside, you feel distant from your own life. That's when it begins to hit you. You haven't really been living. You've been surviving. Surviving stress. Surviving pressure. Surviving emotional exhaustion. Surviving disappointment. Surviving loneliness while pretending you're handling everything fine. And survival mode changes people slowly. When someone spends years emotionally overwhelmed, they stop asking themselves what they truly need. Their focus becomes endurance instead of joy. They stop listening to their emotions because there never seems to be time. Rest starts feeling unproductive. Peace feels unfamiliar. Stillness almost feels uncomfortable. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And for many people, that fear begins the moment life finally becomes quiet enough for them to hear their own emotions again. Because underneath the constant movement and responsibility, there is often a version of yourself that has been waiting to be acknowledged for years. The exhausted version, the lonely version, the version that kept going even when it felt emotionally empty inside. And sometimes, realizing this can feel painful. You begin looking back at how long you ignored your own needs, how many times you forced yourself to stay emotionally strong because you believed you had no other option. You realize you became so focused on coping that you stopped asking yourself whether you were truly okay. And the truth is, many people don't recognize survival mode until their body and emotions begin reacting to it. They feel constantly drained, no matter how much they rest. They become emotionally detached from people they care about. Small problems suddenly feel overwhelming because internally, they've already been carrying too much for too long. Even happiness becomes difficult to fully feel because part of them remains emotionally guarded all the time. That's what prolonged emotional survival does. It teaches a person to stay alert instead of present, to manage life instead of experience it, to keep functioning while quietly losing connection with themselves. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But before someone can choose who they want to become, they first have to recognize the condition they've been living in emotionally. They have to admit that constantly surviving is not the same as truly living. Because living includes rest, connection, peace, honesty, joy without guilt, feeling emotionally safe enough to breathe deeply again. And healing often begins the moment a person stops glorifying exhaustion and finally admits, "I don't want to spend the rest of my life only surviving." That realization is not weakness. It is the beginning of returning to yourself. Strong people are often the first to help others and the last to admit they need help themselves. They know how to comfort people, how to stay calm during difficult moments, how to listen carefully, give advice, solve problems, and carry responsibility without complaining too much. From the outside, they seem emotionally steady, like they can handle anything. But what many people do not see is that strength can slowly become a mask a person feels trapped inside. Because after years of being the strong one, receiving support starts to feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. When someone asks them what's wrong, they automatically say, "I'm okay." When life becomes overwhelming, they isolate themselves instead of reaching out. When they feel emotionally exhausted, they convince themselves they should be able to handle it alone. Not because they truly want to suffer alone, because somewhere along the way, they learned that depending on others felt unsafe. Maybe they grew up in environments where vulnerability was ignored. Maybe they opened up before and felt dismissed, misunderstood, or judged. Maybe they became used to being the emotionally responsible person in every relationship. So eventually, they stopped expecting support altogether. And over time, independence stopped being a choice and became emotional survival. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But before people can choose healthier ways of living, they often have to recognize how deeply old emotional habits shaped them. Many strong people carry a quiet belief they rarely say out loud. If I fall apart, nobody will catch me. So they stay composed, even when they are overwhelmed, even when they are emotionally drained, even when they secretly wish someone would notice they are struggling without needing an explanation. And one of the hardest parts is that strong people often feel guilty for needing comfort at all. They tell themselves, "I should be able to manage this. Other people need support more than I do. I don't want to burden anyone." So instead of asking for help, they carry more stress, more emotional pressure, more loneliness, more responsibility. Until eventually, exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. And emotional exhaustion does not always appear dramatically. Sometimes it appears quietly, losing motivation, feeling emotionally numb, pulling away from people, feeling tired even after resting, becoming irritated by small things because internally there is already too much weight being carried. The difficult truth is that many strong people have spent so much time taking care of everyone else that they no longer know how to let someone take care of them. Receiving support requires vulnerability. It requires honesty. It requires admitting that being human means having limits. And for someone who built their identity around always being dependable, that can feel terrifying. Jung wrote, "Where your fear is, there is your task." And for many emotionally strong people, the task is not becoming tougher. It is learning how to soften without feeling weak, learning that accepting support does not erase independence, learning that emotional openness is not failure, because real strength is not pretending you never struggle. Real strength is allowing yourself to be honest about what you carry. Sometimes strong people believe they must always appear emotionally controlled in order to be respected. So they hide their pain carefully. They smile while overwhelmed. They continue showing up while emotionally exhausted. And eventually, people become so used to seeing them handle everything that nobody realizes how much pressure they are under. That creates a very lonely experience. You begin feeling emotionally invisible. People come to you for comfort, advice, reassurance, and stability, but very few ask how you are truly doing underneath it all. And after years of carrying that role, many strong people quietly start wishing for one thing: to feel emotionally safe enough to stop carrying everything alone. Not to be rescued, not to be pitied, just to finally feel understood without having to constantly prove they are struggling first. Because even the strongest people need support too. Even the people who rarely complain get tired. Even the people who hold everyone else together sometimes need someone to sit beside them and say, "You don't have to carry all of this alone anymore." And sometimes healing begins the moment they finally allow themselves to believe that. Being the reliable person can feel meaningful at first. People trust you, depend on you, call you when things go wrong. They see you as calm, capable, emotionally strong, and responsible. You become the person others lean on during difficult moments because they believe you will always know what to do. And for a while, that role can make you feel valued, needed, important. But over time, constantly being the dependable one begins to carry a quiet emotional cost that very few people notice. Because the person who always supports everyone else is often the person nobody checks on deeply. People assume you are fine because you always appear fine. They assume you can handle things because you always do. So gradually, your struggles become invisible. You become the listener instead of the one being heard. The helper instead of the one receiving help. The emotionally available person who somehow never gets space to fully fall apart themselves. And after years of carrying that role, exhaustion begins building silently inside you. Not because you dislike helping people, but because constantly being emotionally strong for everyone else becomes heavy when nobody asks what it is costing you. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And many reliable people are judged unfairly the moment they stop functioning perfectly. The same people who praise your strength sometimes become uncomfortable when you finally admit you are overwhelmed, because others become attached to the version of you that never needs anything. The version that keeps showing up no matter how exhausted they are. So you begin feeling pressure to maintain that image constantly. You continue answering messages even when emotionally drained. You continue helping people while silently neglecting yourself. You continue saying, "I'm okay," because it feels easier than explaining how tired you truly are. And eventually, you stop asking yourself an important question. Who takes care of you when you are tired of taking care of everyone else? That question can be painful because many reliable people secretly feel alone in ways they struggle to explain. Not physically alone, emotionally alone, surrounded by people who depend on them, but rarely notice when they are struggling too. And over time, resentment can quietly begin growing underneath the surface. Not because you hate the people you care about, because part of you wishes someone would notice your exhaustion without needing you to explain it first. You wish someone would ask deeper questions. You wish someone would tell you that you do not always have to hold everything together. But many reliable people become so skilled at hiding their emotional pain that others genuinely do not realize how much they are carrying. That is the difficult part of always being the strong one. The stronger you appear, the less support people assume you need. Jung wrote, "Where your fear is, there is your task." And for many dependable people, the fear is vulnerability. The fear of disappointing others. The fear of appearing weak. The fear that if they stop holding everything together, everything around them will fall apart too. So they continue pushing themselves beyond emotional limits, even when tired, even when overwhelmed, even when they feel emotionally empty inside. And slowly, they lose connection with themselves. Their needs become secondary. Their emotions become postponed. Their exhaustion becomes normalized. They become so focused on supporting everyone else that they forget they are human too. But nobody can endlessly pour from themselves without feeling the effects eventually. Emotional burnout often grows quietly. It shows up as numbness, irritability, distance, feeling emotionally disconnected from life, feeling exhausted by simple interactions, wanting to disappear for a while just to stop carrying responsibilities for a moment. And many reliable people feel guilty for this exhaustion because they think, I should be grateful people trust me. I shouldn't complain. Other people have bigger problems. So they continue sacrificing themselves emotionally while pretending they are managing fine. But constantly ignoring your own emotional needs is not strength. It is self-abandonment. Real strength includes honesty. It includes recognizing when you are overwhelmed instead of forcing yourself to keep performing emotional stability for everyone around you. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And sometimes, accepting yourself completely means admitting that being reliable has exhausted you too. That constantly carrying responsibility made you lonely sometimes. That always being the strong one became emotionally heavy. And there is nothing weak about admitting that. Reliable people often believe love must be earned through usefulness, through helping, through always being available, through carrying more than everyone else. But your value does not disappear the moment you become tired. You do not have to constantly prove your worth by emotionally overextending yourself. You are allowed to rest, allowed to need support, allowed to stop pretending you can carry everything alone. Because even the people everyone depends on deserve somewhere safe to put their own emotional weight too. There comes a moment when you realize how exhausting it has been to constantly hold everything together, to always stay composed, to always stay responsible, to always be the one who manages the pressure quietly without letting anyone see how much it is affecting you. For a long time, You may not even question it. You simply believe this is who you have to be. The dependable one. The calm one. The person who keeps functioning no matter how overwhelmed they feel inside. So you keep pushing yourself, even when you are emotionally drained, even when your mind feels tired, even when your body is begging for rest. You continue carrying responsibilities because slowing down makes you feel guilty. And after years of living this way, pressure starts feeling normal. You become so used to suppressing your emotions that you no longer notice how tense you are all the time. You stop asking yourself what you need emotionally, because survival becomes more important than self-care. Carl Jung once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." And many people spend years avoiding their emotional exhaustion by staying busy, productive, and emotionally controlled. But eventually, the emotions you ignore begin showing up in other ways. You become impatient more easily. Small problems suddenly feel overwhelming. You feel emotionally disconnected from people you care about. You lose excitement for things that once made you feel alive. Not because you are lazy or ungrateful, because constantly holding yourself together without emotional release eventually drains the human spirit. The difficult truth is that many people tie their worth to how much they can handle. They believe resting means failing. They believe asking for support means weakness. They believe they must constantly prove their value through responsibility, emotional control, and sacrifice. So they continue carrying more than they were ever meant to carry alone. And over time, they forget something important. You are not a machine. You are a human being with emotional limits. You are allowed to feel overwhelmed sometimes, allowed to admit you are tired, allowed to say, "I can't keep doing everything for everyone." But for people who spent years being the strong one, this can feel terrifying. Because if your identity has always been built around holding everything together, then letting go of that pressure can feel like losing a part of yourself. You may wonder, who am I if I stop overfunctioning? Who am I if I stop rescuing everyone else emotionally? Who am I if I finally admit I need rest too? And those questions can feel uncomfortable because many people learned very early that their value came from being useful, dependable, and emotionally controlled. So vulnerability feels unfamiliar. Rest feels undeserved. Stillness feels uncomfortable. But healing often begins when you stop treating yourself like someone who must constantly earn the right to breathe. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And becoming who you truly are often requires releasing the version of yourself that survived through constant pressure and emotional suppression. It means learning that your worth does not disappear when you are tired, that people who truly care about you will not love you less because you finally admit you are struggling, that you do not have to constantly perform strength in order to deserve care, understanding, or rest. Sometimes releasing the pressure to hold everything together looks very small from the outside. It looks like saying no without explaining yourself for an hour afterward. It looks like taking a break before your body forces you to. It looks like answering honestly when someone asks how you are, instead of immediately saying, "I'm fine." It looks like allowing yourself to stop fixing every problem around you. And slowly, something inside begins to soften. You realize how much energy you spent trying to appear emotionally unaffected by everything. How long you carried stress silently because you thought nobody would understand. How often you abandoned your own emotional needs just to avoid disappointing others. That realization can feel emotional because many people do not understand how tired they are until they finally stop running for a moment. And maybe one of the most healing things a person can learn is this: you do not have to break completely before giving yourself permission to rest. You do not have to reach emotional collapse before admitting you have been carrying too much. You are allowed to stop, allowed to breathe, allowed to loosen the pressure you placed on yourself for so many years. Because life was never meant to feel like endless emotional endurance. And you were never meant to carry the entire world on your shoulders alone. For many people, staying busy becomes a way of avoiding themselves, not intentionally. It just happens slowly. You fill your days with work, responsibilities, distractions, conversations, entertainment, or constant thinking, because silence feels uncomfortable. The moment things become quiet, emotions you've been pushing away begin rising to the surface. So you keep moving. You tell yourself you are being productive, responsible, focused. But deep down, part of you is simply trying not to feel everything you've been carrying. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And emotional pain often grows heavier when it is constantly avoided. At first, escaping yourself can look harmless. Overworking so you don't have time to think. Staying constantly distracted. Always checking your phone. Always needing noise in the background. Always planning the next thing. Anything to avoid sitting alone with your own emotions for too long. Because when someone has spent years suppressing sadness, exhaustion, loneliness, disappointment, or fear, stillness can feel unfamiliar, even frightening. Not because quiet is dangerous, because quiet finally allows you to hear yourself clearly. And many people realize they have spent years emotionally disconnected from themselves. They know how to take care of responsibilities, but they no longer know how to take care of their inner life. They know how to function, but they struggle to understand what they are truly feeling underneath the surface. So instead of facing those emotions, they keep escaping into busyness. But eventually, exhaustion catches up. Your body slows down. Your mind feels overwhelmed. You lose motivation for things that once distracted you successfully. And suddenly, all the emotions you avoided begin waiting for your attention. That moment can feel overwhelming at first, because once you stop running emotionally, you begin noticing how tired you really are, how lonely you felt during certain periods of your life, how much pressure you carried silently, how many times you ignored your own pain just to continue functioning. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light but by making the darkness conscious. And before that idea becomes something meaningful, it starts in a very human way. Sitting honestly with yourself, without distractions, without pretending, without immediately trying to fix every feeling that appears. Many people are uncomfortable with emotions because they think every painful feeling must be solved immediately. So the moment sadness, anxiety, regret, or exhaustion appears, they try to suppress it, distract themselves, or push it away. But emotions are not enemies. They are signals. They reveal what has been neglected inside us. And learning to stay present with yourself means allowing your emotions to exist without attacking yourself for having them. It means recognizing that feeling overwhelmed does not make you weak. Feeling sadness does not make you broken. Feeling emotionally tired after carrying too much alone for years is a deeply human response. Sometimes healing begins with very small moments of honesty. Admitting, I've been exhausted for a long time. Admitting, I don't actually feel okay. Admitting, I've spent years trying to outrun emotions I never gave myself permission to feel. Those moments matter because emotional avoidance often keeps people trapped in survival mode. When you constantly escape yourself, you never fully process what hurts you. So the emotional weight remains inside, quietly shaping your thoughts, reactions, relationships, and self-worth. And over time, you may begin feeling disconnected, not only from your emotions, but from life itself. That's why learning to stay present with yourself is so important. Not to overanalyze every feeling, not to become consumed by pain, but to stop abandoning yourself emotionally, to stop treating your inner world like something that must always be ignored in order to survive. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And becoming who you truly are requires honesty with yourself. It requires slowing down enough to hear your own emotional reality instead of constantly escaping from it. That does not mean every day suddenly becomes peaceful. Some emotions may feel uncomfortable at first. Some truths may be painful to acknowledge. But there is something deeply healing about finally sitting beside yourself instead of running from yourself. Because after years of emotional avoidance, one of the most powerful things a person can learn is this: you do not need to fear your own feelings. You only need to stop carrying them alone in silence. And little by little, the more present you become with yourself, the less your emotions begin to feel like something you must constantly escape. Instead, they become part of understanding yourself more honestly, more gently, and with far less shame than before. After carrying emotional weight for a long time, many people begin to believe that struggling quietly is simply part of who they are. They become used to handling things alone, used to staying silent about what hurts, used to comforting themselves because they stopped expecting anyone else to truly understand. And eventually, loneliness starts feeling normal, not because it feels good, because it feels familiar. You tell yourself things like, "I'll deal with it myself. I don't want to bother anyone. I've handled everything alone this long anyway. And maybe part of you genuinely believes that being emotionally independent makes you stronger. But there is a difference between strength and isolation. Strength supports you. Isolation slowly exhausts you. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And many people carry that kind of loneliness every single day. They go to work. They talk to friends. They sit beside family members. They laugh during conversations. They continue functioning normally on the outside, but internally, they feel unseen because there are emotions they never fully share, exhaustion they never explain, pressure they keep hidden. And after years of carrying everything alone, people often forget what emotional safety even feels like. They become uncomfortable with vulnerability. They hesitate before opening up. Even when someone genuinely cares, part of them still expects disappointment or misunderstanding. So instead of expressing what they feel, they minimize it. They say, "It's not a big deal." They say, "I'm just tired." They say, "I'll be okay," even when deep down they are emotionally overwhelmed. The painful part is that many people learned this silence as a form of survival. Maybe there were moments in life when expressing emotions felt unsafe. Maybe they were ignored when they needed comfort. Maybe they became the responsible person too early and slowly learned that their own feelings had to come second. So they adapted. They became emotionally self-reliant. They learned how to carry pain privately. But survival habits that once protected you can eventually become the very things that keep you emotionally disconnected later in life. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And healing often begins when a person realizes they no longer want to spend their life emotionally isolated just because isolation once felt necessary. Because the truth is, no human being was meant to carry endless emotional weight completely alone. No one was meant to constantly suppress their feelings just to appear strong. No one was meant to survive entirely without care, understanding, reassurance, or connection. Even the strongest people need somewhere safe to place their emotional exhaustion sometimes. And one of the hardest things for people who have carried too much alone is learning that receiving support does not make them weak. It makes them human. You do not become less strong because you admit you are tired. You do not become less valuable because you need comfort too. You do not fail because you finally acknowledge how heavy life has felt. In fact, sometimes the strongest moment in a person's life is when they stop pretending they are unaffected by everything they have been carrying. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And part of accepting yourself completely means accepting your emotional needs without shame. Accepting that you were never supposed to function like a machine. Accepting that constantly carrying pain in silence has affected you. Accepting that you deserve support too. Not only when you completely fall apart. Not only when your exhaustion becomes visible to everyone else. Now, as you are. Many people spend years waiting for permission to rest emotionally, permission to slow down, permission to admit they are overwhelmed. But healing often starts the moment you stop demanding endless strength from yourself. The moment you stop treating your emotions like inconveniences. The moment you stop believing you must earn care by suffering quietly. And maybe that is the deepest truth underneath all of this. You were never meant to carry every burden alone. Not the grief, not the pressure, not the loneliness, not the exhaustion, not the fear of disappointing everyone while secretly feeling emotionally drained inside. You were always worthy of support, even during the moments when you convinced yourself you had to handle everything alone. And although emotional weight does not disappear overnight, something begins changing the moment you finally stop hiding it from yourself. You breathe differently. You soften a little. You stop fighting yourself so much internally. And for the first time in a long time, you begin realizing that healing does not mean becoming someone entirely new. Sometimes healing simply means allowing yourself to stop carrying life alone in silence. Maybe for years, you believed that strength meant enduring everything quietly, holding back tears, staying emotionally composed, continuing to function no matter how heavy life became. Maybe you became so used to carrying pain silently that you stopped realizing how much of yourself was disappearing underneath the pressure. But surviving and living are not the same thing. And constantly carrying emotional weight alone is not proof that you are strong enough to handle anything. Sometimes it is simply proof that you became too used to neglecting your own emotional needs. You do not have to keep proving your worth through suffering. You do not have to keep pretending everything feels manageable when it doesn't. You do not have to carry every emotion in silence just because you became skilled at hiding it. The emotional weight you carried alone for years was never meant to define your entire life. It shaped you. It affected you. But it does not have to become your permanent identity. Little by little, you can learn to put some of that weight down, to speak more honestly, to rest without guilt, to stop abandoning yourself emotionally just to keep everyone else comfortable. And even if that process feels unfamiliar at first, it matters. Because underneath all the exhaustion, all the emotional pressure, and all the years spent surviving quietly, there is still a part of you that wants peace. A part of you that wants to feel emotionally safe again.